Hey, Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shannon. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. Could you just say hello to everybody listening and let them know who you are?
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. I am Chelsea Laub. I work with sales professionals on learning how to network in a way that's authentic for them and how to grow their business and their impact and influence in their communities.
I love it. And I know that for a lot of people listening, including myself and a lot of people in my profession, networking is kind of like saying sales, which you also work with sales professionals. So you work with a lot of folks who have a stigma around these words, right?
I do.
And I want to hear from you how you define effective networking.
Okay. So, effective networking, you have to be able to measure your results. And that's one thing I see people do a lot of times that they really are not conscious of. We feel like we have to network as salespeople. So we go to these networking events and it's filled with a room filled with financial advisors and attorneys and real estate agents and insurance professionals. It's like all these people who feel like they have to network. And so if you're in sales, you feel like you have to go do it. And so what I find is that people go and they are not really intentional about it. And then they leave and then they don't have anything to show for it, or they get a couple business cards and they just like add them on LinkedIn and then they're just kind of done. And that's not effective networking. So to answer your question actually more intentionally you have to follow up. You have to be able to be intentional with your networking, actually have a result. My end goal with all networking that I do is to get a one-on-one meeting with people that I think that there's an opportunity to not even do business with necessarily, but just to connect with, to see how we can create something new together. And so really being able to connect and make that personal connection rather than just a new ad on LinkedIn or a new business card in your Rolodex.
I totally agree. And how did you become so passionate about networking and developing a skill in it?
Yeah. So when I was in the financial services industry for about 10 years. So when I was 25 years old, I had this crazy idea to start a financial planning practice all on my own. And a little bit about my background is that I didn't go to school for that. So I went to school to work with kids with special needs. And then I worked in financial services for another advisor for a couple of years and then was like, hey, I can do this. But I was 25, no formal education in the industry, and didn't know anyone in town. So I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and I knew no one in town because I had just moved there. And so when I launched this business, I had learned that the number one reason that people fail in any sort of financial services role is that because they run out of people to call. They run out of people to talk to. And when I was looking at my marketing list of all the people that I could potentially work with, it was pretty measly. I didn't have a lot of people on there. And so what actually happened is right before I started, I sat up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, like cold sweat. Oh my God, who's going to meet with me? Who the heck is going to want to meet with me? 25 years old in a new city, didn't go to school for this. Oh my gosh, am I crazy? And so at that moment, I decided if my one job is to be successful in this business, then my one job is to never run out of people to talk to. And so that's what I did. My whole first year in business, I just went out and met people. And I didn't know it at the time. But as I started going to all these networking events, I learned pretty quickly that I actually am really good at it and I really enjoy it. And so that's not the same story for every person. But with that being my number one goal, I did a lot of trial and error. I saw some pretty crazy, cringy stuff and experienced some interesting experiences. But really, I found out that I liked it just by learning, by doing it and by getting a little uncomfortable.
I love that statement of never running out of somebody to talk to. And I think that, like, in a nutshell, is effective networking. That's the sign, right? Like, never running out of people to talk to, because it means that you've actually made real connections with people and people who pick up the phone or answer your emails. Like, that to me is effective networking, is building a network, without using the same word, building a group of connections that will answer the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I was so surprised by when I first started networking is I thought, who's going to want to take the time to meet with me? I was having this imposter syndrome of like, who's actually going to want to help me? And then I started reaching out to people. And this is a crazy statistic to me. 90% of people do not follow up after a networking event. 90%. It's such a wasted opportunity. Like, why even go? Why even go network? It's so crazy to me. And so what I found is that when I would actually reach out to people and say, hey, I'd love to go to coffee with you and just see how we can learn to support each other in the community and in our careers, 98% of people said yes. So I was shocked and blown away by that, by how willing people actually are to support and to help and to meet you.
Yeah. And I think that it comes down to, we do the thing that's the easiest. So we'll go and we may not follow up. We may not because won't take the initiative to be like, let me figure out how this person can add value for me, or I can add value for this person. Very few people will get creative on like initiating that contact. And I think you're one of those people. And that's the mark of someone who's really successful, right? Is the one who creates the rooms, creates the spaces. Mm-hmm. But I think that more people are likely to accept those invitations if they're presented to them. The problem is that not enough people are taking the initiative. It's kind of like this quiet room where no one's raising their hand and asking for coffee. And even though everybody would say yes, it's just kind of this awkward silence.
Yeah. Yeah. And the day of the cold call, I think, is over. I don't meet very many people who are cold calling for business anymore, and people who are, they're not typically very successful at it. And so if I want to get in front of the CEO of a big company, I can't just pick up the phone and call that CEO unless I have a relationship that is connected to that CEO, or I have a relationship directly with that CEO. So looking at those places where we're networking to be really intentional so that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, so-and-so, I really would like to talk to you about something, or hey, I'd love to see how we can support each other. They're actually going to pick up the phone because you have a relationship.
Yeah. And it works with small business owners too. And you're looking for that deal, that customer, or even that like podcast, that podcast guest, that speaking gig, whatever it is. It's what I realize is the question isn't what do I have to do? The question is who do I have to know? And that's a really big shift when you realize that, yes, you have to be badass at what you do. You have to be able to show up and deliver. But to get invited to the table to showcase it, there must be somebody that's going to bat for you. There must be somebody who's going to invite you. There must be somebody who's going to make that connection. I learned that in my corporate career because of sponsorship, we call it.
Yep.
And mentorship. But ultimately in the entrepreneurial space, I think it's even more important because there's no rules. There's no like linear path to success. And you have to really connect yourself to people who will help you around this jungle gym of a journey as opposed to a ladder, and figure out what's the next rung I should be jumping on. But also, like, when it comes to networking, I think that I want to talk about this. People think, who do I need to know? Who can help me? Like, you use that phrase as well, like, who can help me? Mm-hmm. But I don't think we start enough with who can I help? 100%. And I think that's a really important part. I want you to comment on that.
Absolutely. And I think that is so, so important because actually, there's a book by Adam Grant I think it's called Give and Take. Have you read this?
I haven't read it, but I know Adam's work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. And Adam Grant is just incredible in everything that he does. But one of the things that this book talks about is that there are givers and takers and matchers. And so givers are the people who come to a relationship come to a new relationship and they are willing to give before they ever receive anything in return. And they come into that without ever actually wanting to receive in return. Takers are the people who come with what can I take from you? And then matchers are kind of this, well, if an eye for an eye. If you do one for me, I'll do one for you. And what they found through this study that Adam Grant did is that the people who were willing to give, the givers, actually made the least amount of money and the most amount of money. So if we look at like the statistics, like people who were giving without having any sort of expectation, people who were giving without expectation were making the least amount of money. But people who were giving really intentionally and who had boundaries around their giving, but were still giving from a place of really genuine giving, they were people who were actually the most successful and made the most amount of money. The takers made the least amount of money. And anyway, you have to read the book because it's so fascinating to see how that all works. But that's what I found in my career too, is that when I come to the table and I'm willing to add value to someone else's life and add some value to someone else's career without ever expecting anything in return, I receive so much more back from them. It just happens. I think it's human nature for us to want to support people who have supported us. But I don't ever, there's been there's been a lot of networking, conversations that I've had where I never received anything back from that person, but I was able to add value to them. And that adds to my reputation. So that absolutely is valuable. But my goal when I go into networking is never just to take from someone else. I'm always looking for what can I offer to the people that I'm around. And then if they have something to give back to me, then great. But if not, then I've done my part and I can feel really good about that.
Yeah, I think people, they underestimate the power of just showing up ready to serve, ready to give, and also identifying what they have to offer, which is a whole separate thing. But I feel like we undervalue that long game play. And that is really the thing that generates the payoff, I think, is when you can do a long game play and you go in the interest of simply making the connection. You meet people, you offer value, and you walk away and you go, you're welcome. Have a nice day. You know what I mean? And next thing, something comes back around, or you have, let's say you're launching a book, you have something coming out, you have something happening, and you're like, hey, would you mind sharing this? And I feel like there's this law of reciprocity where it's not transactional, but I feel like there's an energetic balancing happening where it's like, this person poured into me. I feel like I would be happy to pour into them as an act of gratitude, but not as a transaction, right? There's not an expectation, but there's a, hey, it's the least I can do. Thank you. And I think that as humans, we're just kind of designed to be on this kind of equilibrium of give and take. And we know when we feel like we're taking too much or we feel like we're giving too much. I think a lot of people are aware of that and they're trying to balance that out. So it's almost like giving them an opportunity to do that and they'll take it. So but I think that we just assume that everybody, why would they give me their time? Why would they do this for me? And yeah, and here's what's funny. We say that and we're also the people who would give. But like, why would they? We don't assume that they're like us. And it's just such a funny psychology to be like, well, wouldn't you? Yeah, but they're different. Are they?
Right. Well, I mean, we're all human, right? And we all, so actually, this is kind of a funny thing. So, I mean, one of my most recent clients that I just brought on is someone who I met 10 years ago at a networking event. We had a coffee meeting. We've stayed connected on LinkedIn a little bit. So we've kind of kept up with each other's worlds. But she literally just called me. We've never done business with each other before. She called me a week ago and said, hey, Chelsea, I need you now. But we've kept up with each other and we've added value to each other, even through social media, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But it's so just being able to nurture those conversations. You're talking about the long game. You have to be able to nurture those relationships intentionally over time and be comfortable with the fact that you may not get something from it now or ever. But more than likely, if you can nurture that relationship, it's going to come back around for you in the future.
Exactly. You have to be able to make those deposits and just know that they may not generate a financial return for you, but you never know which ones are going to come to fruition. But you mentioned networking events, so I want to dive into that. And I personally, I have a history with networking events, accounting conferences, all the things. We all kind of have to go to these things. We got to get our education hours in. We got to go and mingle with our fellow professionals. I have some certain opinions on the types of networking events I think people should go to if they must. But I want to hear from you on your take on networking events right now. Are they outdated? Are they changing? Are they beneficial? What are your opinions on people going to these networking events with the goal of doing some type of business development?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think was really great about the pandemic is that it opened up a lot of opportunities outside of just one-on-one coffee meetings or networking events and association conferences and meetings and things like that. So there's so many more opportunities now to really network however you want to. I'm a big believer that every person is a little bit different. I'm an Enneagram practitioner also, so I do a lot with Enneagram and personality profiles. And one of the things that I love is that every person, every type is different. And they have a different motivation and a different kind of come from. And there's networking opportunities for every single different type of person. And so I'm an Enneagram 7. I love to be out and about. I love stimulation. I love lots of people. That's really great for me. And for someone else, that is not going to work. And so I love to go to associations and conferences and meet new people because it stimulates me. But for someone else, it is actually crippling. And so there's different kinds of groups that you can join. There's BNI if you need a lot of structure. And that did not work for me because I don't handle structure very well. But there's the associations and conferences. One of the best ways that I've actually learned to network is through nonprofit work. So I have a big heart for community. I think that people who are able to give back to the community have an obligation to do so. And so I serve on nonprofit boards and I volunteer with different organizations in town that are aligned with what I'm passionate about. And I think that's a really great way to meet people that you want to be around, especially if you're in finance. I mean, there's a lot of people who need what you do for their nonprofit organizations. I also think my brother's a great example. He sells cars. And he also, like, in his personal life, he loves to do woodworking. My grandpa was a woodworker. We did all of this woodworking stuff growing up. He joined a woodworking club and he met all of these people through that ended up actually eventually being his clients. And so there's interest groups. There's things that you're passionate about. I am a big believer that your networking shouldn't be something that isn't aligned with who you are. So you have to kind of think outside the box sometimes. But if you're someone who loves woodworking, join a woodworking club. If you're someone who's passionate about helping children learn to read, join a nonprofit who helps do that kind of work. If you're someone who loves to help professionals develop their speaking skills, then join a speakers association and get involved. But the big thing is not just going to these events and just being a business card passer outer at these events. It's really figuring out how to add value to that organization. So instead of going to an association event, go a couple times, then figure out how you can serve. How can you serve the organization? How can you put yourself also in a position where you are seen as an expert, as the expert that you are, which is a whole other conversation we can talk about too. But it doesn't have to be just like go to associations and organizations and pass out business cards. There's really ways to get really intentional. I draw out this web for people a lot of times where maybe your kid plays baseball. And so you have your kid's baseball in the middle of this web. And you have a line that goes out of the different kinds of people that are also at that event. So you have the people that run the organization that your kid plays baseball for. You have the parents that are there. You have all of these different things. And then you start drawing the webs out. And then what kind of services and opportunities do those people need? And then those are the places where you want to start plugging yourself in. But it doesn't have to be just wheeling and dealing. That's not how people want to make relationships.
And not only that, I feel like that networking events, when they're designed, like when part of the description of what you're doing is to network or to pass out business cards basically, or to exchange contact info, it's like speed dating where we all know why we're here. None of us want to be here. And we're all kind of with our guard up, or we're not totally at ease. We're not totally, some of us are totally ourselves in this element, like you said, but for most people, I would say, especially in some of the professional services spaces, it's really challenging to be on and at these networking events and really showcase your real personality. I think what you said is spot on. And it's actually parallel to dating. Because I always said, I will meet my partner when I'm doing something I already love and they just happen to be there. It will not be when I'm showing up to different places hunting for them. It will not be through the hunt. It will be through simply living your life, and they will be there with you because that's what you're looking for, is somebody who shares what you want to be doing, shares your values, shares if you do something with your church. Of course, you would want clients, partners, business colleagues who would share your values. You would want to be working with someone who also volunteers for the same charity. In my case, it actually was that. Me and my husband volunteered for our business fraternity that we were both in when we were in college at different schools, but it was the ultimate connection because it was an inherent commonality you could talk about. And it wasn't a forced combining of different faces in the same room with icebreaker exercises. God help me. You shouldn't need icebreaker exercises if you actually are creating the right rooms.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. My husband and I met at a housewarming party because we both had mutual friends that had brought us together at a housewarming party. And it gave us so many things to talk about. And I totally agree with you. And I align networking and dating very closely to each other. I think it is very similar. But I was talking
same thing
one day. You what?
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Right. So the idea of going on a first date is the goal of going on a first date is not to say, I'm going to marry this person, but to say, is there going to be a second date? And sometimes I think that's what people mess up on in networking, is that they come in with, I want this person to become my client. I want this person to sign up with me right now. I want to do business. They jump right in. A perfect example, I went to a speed networking event, which is absolute hell. It's not fun. A speed networking event a long time ago. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was the fourth financial advisor in a row of financial advisors. And so by the time people had gotten to me, they had already talked to 3 other people that do what I did. And so I caught on pretty quickly and was able to change my elevator pitch, my introduction of myself very quickly, which actually set me apart so drastically from those other people that I got more clients from that event than any other event I've ever been to, because it was so different. And what I found out about that was that the people ahead of me, they were launching with a product. They were saying, I'm here to talk about life insurance with you. I'm here to talk about investments. Where do you have a Roth IRA? They were jumping right in with that kind of information before ever getting to know the person. And I think when we're in business, that's one thing that we do is we use our industry terms. We have a product that's in our mind that we're really passionate about, that we want other people to know about. And so we launch in with that before we ever actually build the rapport to see if there's a second date even possible.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the analogy because I always talk about it with fishing. It's like casting the line so many times. And I'm like, what if you just worked on the bait? Like you really worked on the bait, so you only had to cast the line once and people were like gravitating to it. And what you're describing is similar because it's like, how could I be captivating where there's going to be enough curiosity about what I do that they will call me after? Not can I get 3 weeks of dates into one elevator pitch so like they want to buy from me today. That's not the goal.
Right.
I think that there's too much emphasis on this quick elevator pitch, speed networking thing to say, oh, how do I distill everything I do into 2 sentences? And I go, that's not the point. The point is to get the next question.
Yep.
The point is to trigger that.
I'm an advocate for ditching the pitch. I don't think that an elevator pitch is actually a positive thing. How often are we actually in a position where we have to stand up in front of a person and explain ourselves with no feedback from the other person, describe who we are? I mean, podcasts, yes. Yeah. And maybe, yes, I had to do that today. There's like very few opportunities, I suppose, now where that's actually the way that we introduce ourselves. Yeah. The way we introduce ourselves is so much more conversational. And so I think that's one thing is we have to practice. We have to know what our value actually is. We have to know what we actually offer other than products, because people don't care what your product is. They care about who you are, how you're going to help them, and how they're going to feel when they're working with you.
Yeah,
they don't
absolutely.
care about if you sell life insurance. All these products are really important things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if you're not the person that they should be working with, if they don't feel that connection with you. So totally agree.
Yeah, I very seldom have used my I help statement in real life, in real conversation. It feels very strange now. I actually met someone last night who just said, the question is always, what do you do? Mm-hmm. It's always, which is very American, by the way, to be like, what do you do? Not who you are, but what do you do? And I said, I serve as a CFO to about a dozen different business owners. And, oh, okay. So then it's just like, what kinds of businesses? What do you do? How do you do that? It starts the next conversation, but it's also quick enough where I can get across what I do and then say, what do you do? And start that conversation without really creating a ton of confusion, needing to go into a whole monologue. That drives me insane too. When you take up the space explaining everything you ever do and it's, whoa, I just asked you, I was looking for doctor, lawyer, accountant or something. That's all I was looking for. But I think I think the actual pitches are longer than the expected answer.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And and there's an emotional intelligence component there too, that I think is really important with networking. That there's a statistic that shows that 95% of people think that they are self-aware and only 10 to 15% actually are. And so a lot of people go into a conversation like that thinking that they know how how they're coming across and how that other person is receiving them. And that's not actually usually true. We usually have no idea how people are actually receiving us. And so I'm a huge advocate for developing that emotional intelligence component of this too, because really to be good at networking, you have to have self-awareness. You have to have social skills. You have to be able to manage your own emotions and manage other people's. I mean, you have to really develop a really strong emotional intelligence so that you can network effectively. But to your point, I mean, when you launch into this narration of everything that you do and who you serve and who you help, people zone out. They're not actually listening to you anymore.
No, there's no curiosity because what you've done is you've closed off, like you have it all. You basically have pre-answered all the questions and almost uninvited them from asking more questions. If you have more information to share out the gate, they're also afraid to ask another question because they're going to get in the chapter 2 of the monologue. So it's okay. Yeah. And I think you have to be really self-aware about that. And I wanted to ask you about this. How can we, let's say we're at these networking events, even if we're in BNI, a networking thing, I was in BNI for a while, so I know how it works. Or we're just in these like masterminds, networking events, conferences, whatever it may look like. And I know a lot of people who come to these events, even if they're like shy, introverted, they come and they make a big step to go to these events. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about maximizing the outcome of going. Going is the first step. Yeah. But let's talk about the maximization of the value of the event, but also how to leave a lasting impression and be memorable, which I know are interrelated, but slightly different. So I want to lead in with, how do we leave a lasting impression and be memorable? And then how can you get the most out of events?
Yeah. So the first thing I always talk to people about when you're going into an event is check yourself. Check your body language. It's like, check your mood. I've been to a million networking events where people are standing in the corner, they're on their phones, they're not looking up, they're not looking around the room, they're closed off. So people stand in circles, which are not inviting. They're you can tell that they're uncomfortable. So their shoulders are kind of hunched in. Their body language is not inviting. And so that is the first and honestly the easiest thing that I always tell people is just check yourself first. Check your body. There's the Amy Cuddy has the power of body language TED Talk. And it is so good. I talk to people about that all the time. If you're nervous, if you're worried, if you're in your own head, go into the bathroom close the stall and power pose for 30 seconds. It seems so silly, but put your hands on your hips and act like a superhero for a few seconds to kind of check yourself a little bit. So that's the first thing, because really you're not going to be memorable to someone if your body language is saying and your face is saying that you are nervous and you don't want to be there. So that's the first thing I tell people. And the second thing is you have to know your value. Go in there being open-minded, like you talked about, being curious, asking questions rather than telling people things, but you have to know your value too and know how to connect with people and kind of learn when to add in a little bit about what you do. Oh, that's something I help families with, or I'm really passionate about that. We should talk about this more sometime. Remembering that we're not going in for the sale, we're going in for, I want to help you. People remember people who want to support them. And so those are the two things that I usually tell people is make sure you're checking yourself, check your body language, check your phone, make sure that it's put away somewhere, and really knowing your value and knowing when to add it.
I would add too that have a, like before you do a follow-up with someone, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, I don't know, but when we schedule like the coffee chat, or I'd love to connect with you over coffee after. Personally, I get those requests and I'm like, what do you want from me? Because I'm a Bostonian who's always on the defense and going, so you want my time? What am I getting for it? Other than a coffee. Anyway, I can get my own coffee. That's fine. But there's kind of this idea of, I would like to discuss blank, or I would specifically like to talk to you about how I can help connect you to, you mentioned like, Shannon, you mentioned you were trying to launch a book. I know somebody I can connect you to. I would love to talk to you and see if it would be a worthwhile connection for you and understand your goals a bit better. That makes sense. I think when you have an objective and you have a specific thing that you want to talk about, it's way more likely to happen, and it's way more likely to be well received and accepted than if you go in and say, hey, can we chat over coffee? I can't do that with all 100 people here. But if you can tell me, this is what I'd like to talk about with you, even if it is to serve them, here's the other thing. Even if they say, I just really need some help with my podcast and I would love your input on this. This actually happened. Somebody said, can we book a half hour and tell me about what you do for your podcast? Absolutely. Because It was like confined to a certain topic. I'm not just giving my time away for no reason. I said, now I'm clear on how I can help you and what the objective is, and we can accomplish that.
Yeah, this is a great example. This just happened to me just last week, where I met someone at a networking event and they reached out asking to get to know me over coffee. And so I said, sure. And we met over Zoom. And this person, it felt like a bait and switch, because what had happened was, hey, I want to learn about you. I want to get to know you. And then what had actually happened in that meeting is that this person was trying to sell me on their business and trying to show me why I should refer them business. And I was like, hold on, this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. And so I felt like it was a total bait and switch. So I think that what you're saying is spot on, Shannon. When you're reaching out to someone, you're wanting to make a connection, it's really about making a connection. And we have to be honest with people. Our time is the thing that we cannot get back. We cannot earn more time. We can earn more money. We cannot earn more time. And so if we're spending our time outside of our business, outside of our family, doing work or doing these one-on-one meetings with people, it has to be valuable, or we have to be able to provide value back. And so, yes, absolutely. When you're following up with someone, I was really interested in this thing that you said. I'd love to talk more about this if you're open to it. Just going into it with exactly what you said is the language I would use. I want to learn more about how to do a podcast. Tell me about your process. I would love for you to share your process with me if you're open to it.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, sometimes I'll meet someone and I'm like, I don't know what it is yet that we can do together, but I know that there's synergy here. I'll say that in my email to them. I've really enjoyed meeting you. I think that there's a lot that we could do in the community together. Would love to get together for coffee and see how we can support each other.
Yeah. And that would be an easy yes, because it's okay. There's an observation there, but also it's personalized, because when you can if you could receive the same message, or if 100 people could get the same message saying, hey, I'd just like to connect over coffee. I'm like, why me? Is this really just for me? Are you being intentional about it? I couldn't tell you how many accidental sales calls I've ended up on because people invited me to connect after an event. And I'm like, oh, you're trying to sell me your software. It's kind of like the feeling of getting invited on a date just for a hookup. And you're like, oh, that's not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking to just give it away. It really does feel like dating all the time. I always parallel it to that because the same emotions come up for me where I'm like, oh, I feel kind of used right now. Like you don't actually like me. You just wanted something out of me. So it's a really interesting dynamic when we're kind of guarded now. I think that there's so many post-COVID, we're doing more networking. We're in more networking groups. You and I are in a networking group together. And it's kind of like, you don't want to question everyone's intentions, but you also have to be a little bit, what's the word? You have to be protective of your time, and you have to be protective of your energy. So you can't give it away to everybody. So let's talk about being more selective in, it sounds like the contrary to a networking conversation, but it's like, how do you pinpoint the right connections? How do you attract the right connections? Because it's one thing to network for the sake of numbers and volume, but let's talk about networking with the intention and with the certain goals in place. Like, how do we intentionally go in and get what we need as opposed to going to Target and walking out spending way more than we thought we were going to? Like, where's our target list for networking events?
That's a great question. And I think it's such an individual thing, and it's an industry thing too, right? When I was in financial services, it was a 10-3-1 was our ratios. So I had to meet 10 people to get 3 meaningful fact-finding meetings to get 1 client. That was kind of that's the industry numbers, 10-3-1. And I think what I've found is a lot of industries are similar to that. And so as long as you're in front of 10 people, and depending on what your capacity is that you need to bring on, I think that going back, knowing what those numbers are, I think is important. How many people do you need to meet to bring someone in as a client? I think that is the first thing. It goes way back to before you ever even think about networking. It's what do you actually want to achieve here? Because if you go in blind, then your networking results are going to be kind of scattered and all over the place. And you're going to spend a lot of time not having meaningful conversations. My first year as a financial advisor, this is a great example. I had 524 meetings that year. I grew my network to over 1,000 people. Now, that doesn't mean I had 524 or 1,000 new clients, thankfully. And I spent a lot of time, and a lot of those meetings were not meetings that were helpful to me or my business at all, because I was just taking anything that I could. What it did help me with is I started to learn, okay, this is what my ratios are, 10-3-1 or whatever that ratio was. And so I think you do have to get into the numbers of what your ratios are and how many people you need to meet. For me, it was an efficiency thing too. And for you, I think you're a 3 on the Enneagram, right?
Yeah.
So efficiency is really important. And you don't have unlimited time. We talked about it a little bit ago. And so what I worked really hard at is, how do I position myself as an expert in this community as quickly as possible and get in front of as many people as possible? And so I started doing workshops. I started doing trainings, and I love doing workshops. I love speaking to people, and I have a natural talent for doing that. But that was a really effective way of being able to get in front of a group of 30 people at once, instead of having 30 one-on-one meetings to see if those were going to be people that were going to be good clients. And so networking can look like delivering workshops. It can look like podcast interviews. It can look like business development trainings. I mean, it can look like a lot of different things. But going back to your original question, you have to really dig into your business and figure out, 1, what is your ultimate goal? And 2, what are the ratios? How many people do you need to be in front of to get there before you ever even launch into your actual strategy?
Totally agree. But let's talk about Mingle, because we haven't touched on this yet. Tell us about Mingle, how it came about, what its goals are, and what you're working on with it.
Yeah, so Mingle is my course that I'm developing an online course currently, and it's a one-on-one coaching program I take people through now, and workshops and trainings as well. But basically, I was meeting with my business coach, and I was kind of trying to figure out, I love a lot of the work that I was doing, but I wasn't really feeling fulfilled. And so we were having this conversation about, well, what is Chelsea's thing? What do you do that's really well? What do you do really well? And I kind of made a joke of, if I could just get paid to network, that would be amazing. And he was like, well, Chelsea, I think you can. And I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, that's not a thing. People don't pay to network. I've been doing this stuff for free for 10 years, for a decade. Like, people don't pay for this. And so we started kind of talking through it though. And he's, well, tell me about your process. And so I started walking him through my process, and he was helping me kind of dig into the weeds with this. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, people actually need this kind of help. People need help learning how to network. And so I developed Mingle, which is the process that I've used to network over the last 10 years. I've learned from a lot of other people, taken some things from other approaches, and I've created my own process here for how to network. And so what we talk about in this program, no matter what way you're taking this, you're consuming this information, we're talking about the practical skills of networking. So we've talked about what conversations are off limits, what conversations are on limits. One of my favorite networking questions is, how do you eat an Oreo? I think everybody eats an Oreo differently. And there's a group of 5 of us that we had this conversation one day. And now every time I see those people around town, I'm like, you're wrong. You eat an Oreo completely wrong. So it's just those kind of lighthearted questions that get you permission to go a little bit deeper with people, but we have to start off with some small talk. Anyway, so it's the practical skills of networking. It's the strategy. So we talked about that web a little bit ago that I help people build of, here's who I want to meet and here's everyone that they are around that's in their circle. I get really strategic with them about that. We talk about your personal brand, knowing your value, knowing who you are. Building that self-awareness is such an important component to effective networking. The people who are the most effective at networking are people who have the highest self-awareness. And then we talk about like your online strategy as well. So I kind of look at it, Mingle, like a PR and marketing strategy for individuals. As a company, most individual people don't need PR, except that you do, because you're marketing yourself all the time. And if you're not actively in control of your personal brand and of your PR, then somebody else, that community is kind of telling you who you are instead. And so I'm actively helping people manage and launch those strategies into their world to help grow their businesses.
I love it. I totally agree. I always say too, and I agree with brand builders when they say, I think they say something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, if you don't develop a reputation, one will be assigned to you.
Yes.
And I love that, because I was like, oh, that's actually really true. Like, you will have a reputation one way or another. It's just a question of how much control do you want to have over it.
Exactly. And that's what I'm doing with Mingle, is for individuals who are in sales, who are growing their businesses. If you have a new product that you're trying to launch, trying to get out into the community, or you've realized that your brand and your reputation is not what you want it to be, I'm helping people facilitate those kinds of strategies.
Perfect. And how can people find out more about Mingle and more about you and what you're working on?
Yeah, so there's a couple different places you can find me. So LinkedIn is the best place. I post most of my content on there. So it's just Chelsea Laub, Laub is the last name. And LinkedIn is great. My website is just chelsealaub.com, and I have /Mingle. Mingle is one of the options at the top of the website there that you can go and learn more. And then I have an Instagram page as well, which is mingle.kc for Kansas City.
Love it. Awesome, Chelsea. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and let me know how we can support you. Guys, follow her. Make sure you're tagging her and share a biggest takeaway on Instagram, and make sure you're tagging. Remind me the handle again for Mingle.
Yep, it's at mingle.kc.
At mingle.kc, guys, tag her, tag Mingle if you learned something from today's episode, and you're going to be changing the way that you're networking in the future. Chelsea, thank you so much.
Thank you.